Welcome, everyone, to this exciting presentation. I'm very happy to introduce my friend and colleague, Mary Lou Singleton, who has been a midwife and home birth worker for over 25 years. This is the presentation that Mary Lou gave at the 2023 convention of Women's Declaration USA called Reproductive Technology as a Threat to Women's Liberation. It was an absolutely excellent presentation, and I'm so happy that Mary Lou was willing to take the time to give it to us again for purposes of recording. So thanks, Mary Lou, for being here. Go ahead and take it away.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored to speak for WDI, my favorite organization. So let's go ahead and get started. Women create humanity. As of today, every human on Earth was born through the body of a woman. Over the course of 10 lunar cycles, through our blood and our sweat and our tears, women transform the raw genetic material containing the blueprints of a human being into a person. This magic birthing force is at the root of both our power and our oppression. Men envy it and men want to own it. And female erasure from human reproduction is a tale as old as patriarchy. Women make people and men take credit for it. This manifests as patrilineage, where ancestral descent is traced through the male line. Most of us carry our father's surnames, and most American women, married or not, continue to believe children should have their father's last names. In many cases, this is a survival tactic on the part of women who want to pacify male egos and not risk angering the men who fathered their children. Women remain economically dependent on these men, and passing on male surnames is viewed as a way of ensuring continued male support through child rearing. Historically, children born to women who were not legally the property of men through marriage were labeled illegitimate. These children were denied inheritance rights. They and their mothers faced social punishment. This term has fallen out of fashion in the United States, but public health organizations and societal think tanks still write articles on the crisis of out-of-wedlock births. While men have readily claimed or rejected ownership of children after birth, for most of human history, pregnancy and birth were solely women's work. Human reproduction was the domain of women. Women labored and birthed at home in the company of their mothers, sisters, friends, and midwives. As evidenced by the success of humans in becoming the dominant species on the planet, most of the time the reproductive process went well. But sometimes births resulted in deaths. And history is full of stories of men blaming women, especially midwives, for the deaths of their offspring. Men began to believe that they should be in charge of childbirth. In Europe, male attempts to control childbirth and eradicate midwives began in the Middle Ages. Men invented forceps, metal tongue-like devices used to extract babies from women's bodies during difficult labors. Kept exclusively in the hands of men, forceps marked the beginning of male domination over childbirth. Men also invented chloroform and ether and began advertising anesthetized birth to women in the 1800s. These drugs were only available for male attendants. Despite these new technologies, most women still preferred to give birth in the company of other women. So men escalated their campaign to control birth. From the late 1800s through the 1930s, industrialized medical forces in the U.S. successfully campaigned to criminalize midwifery and force all women to give birth with state-licensed male attendants. These medical men preferred to centrally manage birthing women rather than attend individual births at home. In 1900, nearly 100% of American women gave birth at home, half with male attendants and half with female relatives or community midwives. By 1938, 50% of American births took place in hospitals, and nearly all births were attended by male physicians. This was before widespread availability of antibiotics and safe blood transfusions. There was no evidence that birthing in the hospital created better outcomes for women and their babies. Maternal and neonatal deaths both increased when birth moved to the hospital en masse. Forcing birthing women into the hospital imposed the industrial model onto birth. Doctors managed pregnant women assembly line style, and babies were the end product of the process. By the 1950s, women entered the hospital in labor, where doctors anesthetized them, restrained them to beds with leather straps, sometimes manually dilated their cervixes, and then pulled the babies out of their bodies with forceps. Everyone now understood that babies were a product delivered by the medical industry. Industrial medicine continues to receive credit for the creation of new humans. Over the past 75 years, women have lost trust in their own ability to birth and have placed this trust instead in the medical system. Nearly every woman who receives mainstream prenatal care and then births in a hospital truly believes that she and her baby would have died without technological intervention. Despite industrial birth deviating from normal physiology nearly all the time, we live under the twin illusions that hospitals make birth safer and that conditions in hospital birth have improved over the years. Leather restraints have been replaced by pink and blue monitor belts. General anesthesia has given way to numbing women from the waist down. Women now supposedly have the choice whether or not to comply with industrial birth practices, but fear, propaganda, and sometimes outright coercion result in nearly all women choosing restraints and anesthesia. Fewer than 2% of women give birth outside of the hospital system in the United States. That's a home birth. That's a hospital birth. If we factor out improvements in treating severely premature infants and infants born with congenital defects, medical outcomes for newborns have not changed significantly since the late 1960s. But the rate of cesarean birth has increased from 5% to 32% and rising. Far from improving outcomes for mothers, the outcomes for mothers are getting worse, especially among Black and Native American women. American women of every demographic are more likely to die in childbirth now than they were 25 years ago. We now have over 3 generations of women whose subjective experience of pregnancy and birth has been overshadowed by endless lab testing, ultrasound scanning, and other forms of medical surveillance. Women are so removed from the biological continuity of pregnancy and birth, transforming seamlessly into motherhood, that most American women describe their entry into motherhood as when I brought you home from the hospital. And now the entry into motherhood is increasingly described as when you were placed in my arms after the surrogate birthed you. We can all recognize the invisibility of women and the erasure of pregnancy and birth as the beginning of motherhood in the right's anti-abortion mantra, adoption, not abortion. The profoundly life-changing process of pregnancy, which is the foundational experience of every human being, is casually disregarded. With the embrace of surrogacy, reproductive liberals now engage in the same erasure of the biological basis of motherhood. Both pro-surrogacy and anti-abortion rhetoric center around the belief that human beings are created at fertilization. Women's bodies are just incubators, serving a temporary role before babies can be delivered to their rightful owners. The primal physical mothering that is pregnancy and childbirth is degraded and erased. Throughout history, upper-class families have stolen children from poor women through adoption. The legalization of abortion in the United States in 1973 drastically decreased the number of children available to adopt. In 1976, a male lawyer named Noel Keene developed the legal concept of surrogacy and drafted the first surrogacy contracts. In 1980, courts ruled these contracts legal, and Elizabeth Kane became the first paid contracted surrogate. In 1985, the first gestational surrogacy occurred when a woman was paid to be implanted with and gestate a genetically unrelated embryo. Until 1990, most surrogacy cases involved women undergoing artificial insemination with the buyer's sperm and the woman's own eggs. Since 1990, most surrogacy has involved in vitro fertilization of embryos implanted into women who gestate and birth the babies. That's Chrissy Teigen kissing the belly of the working class woman that she hired to birth her baby. The foundational patriarchal belief that only genetic gamete contribution legitimizes a child has morphed into gestational surrogacy. Like their anti-abortion contemporaries, surrogacy advocates believe that embryos are legal entities separate from the women who gestate them. In both cases, ownership of children begins with fertilization. Whether a pregnancy is a result of sex with a man or embryo transfer, a woman is legally obligated to carry to term. The woman's physical labor that creates the baby is unrelated to the child. Before gestational surrogacy, the women hired to make babies for others were labeled surrogate mothers. Now they are simply referred to as surrogates or gestational carriers. The word mother is reserved for the buyer of the baby, if the buyer happens to be female. Surrogacy represents the end game of liberal equality feminism. Women can now insert their gametes into another person and come back 9 months later to collect their legal property. The past few years have brought an enormous amount of propaganda promoting surrogacy. Liberal feminist trendsetters have been at the forefront of the campaign. Sex and the City star Sarah Jessica Parker bragged that she used other women as surrogates because she did not want to endure the health risks of pregnancy. She also stated that pregnancy and childbirth would derail her career. Media stories tell us that Parker's promotion of surrogacy convinced her co-star Cynthia Nixon to also hire a working-class woman to gestate and birth a child. Other prominent female entertainers who have procured their children through surrogacy include Nicole Kidman, Tyra Banks, Lucy Liu, Chrissy Teigen, Paris Hilton, Rebel Wilson, Jodie Foster, and Amber Heard. Each of these women has a distinct brand and is used by the media to market surrogacy to different demographic groups. In many liberal feminist circles, gestating and birthing a baby for a gay man or gay couple is a badge of honor. This service earns women social capital among progressives. Big Fertility sells reproductive technology as an integral part of gay rights. Gay style setters are buying babies at breakneck speed. This is gay fashion designer and star of Queer Eye, Tan France, and he's released a photo shoot of himself naked and holding an ultrasound image of a fetus over his abdomen to announce that he was acquiring a baby through surrogacy. Elton John, Perez Hilton, Neil Patrick Harris, Clay Aiken, Anderson Cooper, Lance Bass. At this point, it's hard to think of a famous contemporary gay male entertainer who hasn't bought a baby through the egg and surrogacy market. Gay conservative darling Dave Rubin and his husband hired 2 separate surrogates at the same time, one each to gestate embryos created with purchased eggs and their individual sperm. The Kardashian family, high-class trendsetters at the forefront of marketing transgenderism in 2015, have played a prominent role in selling surrogacy. Kim Kardashian has said that hiring surrogates to create her youngest 2 children was the best decision she ever made. She had experienced complications with her second pregnancy and did not want to risk her health having another child. So she hired a working-class woman to grow her children, offloading the medical risks to the surrogate. Khloe Kardashian, considered to be the most likable and relatable of the Kardashian women, also purchased a child through surrogacy. Khloe's press appearance about her complicated emotions surrounding surrogacy are being used to buffer criticism of the practice. In interviews that serve as controlled opposition, glamorous, down-to-earth Khloe admits that surrogacy is economically exploitative and creates poor infant bonding. But of course, no one is suggesting ending the practice. Opening up a conversation about the economic ethics of surrogacy, however, creates room to discuss other possible ways to outsource reproduction, now including whole-body gestational donation. In the April 2023 edition of the Journal of Theoretical Medical Bioethics, Anna Smadger suggests that the solution to the exploitive nature of surrogacy is to use the bodies of so-called brain-dead women to gestate babies. While this may seem far-fetched, there is historical precedence to the practice. In 2013, a woman in Texas named Marlise Munoz suffered a pulmonary embolism when she was 14 weeks pregnant. She was declared brain dead, and her husband wanted to remove her body from life support. Munoz was a paramedic and had always expressed that she did not want to be kept alive artificially. The hospital refused to honor the family's wishes, citing Texas law mandating life-saving procedures if a legally brain-dead woman is pregnant. Munoz was forcibly kept on life support for over 2 months until a judge ruled in favor of her family and she was allowed to die. More recently, in the summer of 2023, 2 brain-dead patients were used in transplantation research. Kidneys with human DNA that had been grown in genetically engineered human-pig hybrids were transplanted into men who had been declared brain dead. The men were kept alive for over a month while scientists observed the function of the transplanted organs. The prospect of brain dead surrogates makes the current state of surrogacy seem almost quaint. Buying babies usually requires buying eggs and sperm, and the human gamete market is booming. Young women and men are promised easy money for selling their eggs and sperm. Mainstream culture and the fertility industry use the term donate for the process in order not to invoke scrutiny or public distaste. Big Fertility bombards female college students with ads for egg donation. The quality of these ads has changed in the past few years, with many companies now incentivizing women with the opportunity to save some of their own eggs for future use in exchange for the remaining eggs to be sold to strangers. Buying human gametes has been thoroughly normalized. People cavalierly browse catalogs looking for desirable genetic material to create their lab-grown children. Many feminists who balk at other aspects of reproductive technology see no problem with women purchasing sperm brokered by the fertility industry. Some women view these transactions as a step toward reproductive autonomy. Sperm is practically a waste product, and men do not suffer physically from its extraction. Aside from the complicated ethics of purchasing human genetic material, the commercial sperm industry relies on pornography for its very existence. One repeat sperm seller wrote the following about pornography and sperm banks. After filling out a questionnaire and interacting with an all-female staff, I would get escorted to a small donation room, given a small plastic tube, and be expected to bust a nut. All the banks I've been to have their own selection of smut. Usually it took the form of a pile of magazines, or if I was lucky, a small screen mounted on the wall with a bevy of DVDs on an adjacent table. Growing up in the age of internet porn, I was intrigued by these relics. I had never seen porn DVDs before I started providing a sample of my semen to sperm banks. Some of the discs looked almost as old as me, artifacts from the mid-90s with names like Anal Frenzy 5 and Cumshot Chronicles 3. Let's compare this process to so-called egg donation, which activist Jennifer Law calls egg poaching. In order to sell her eggs or have her own eggs extracted for the purpose of IVF, a woman is not sent into a pornography-filled room to masturbate. She is first given high-dose oral contraceptive pills to override her own fertility cycle, and I would love to discuss the side effect of these drugs, which are being mass-produced to women. So you could buy me a coffee or subscribe to my Substack if you'd like to hear my thoughts on that. The woman takes this medication for 3 weeks and then is subjected to a transvaginal ultrasound to assess her ovaries. When it has been determined by ultrasound that she does not have any ripening egg follicles, she is prescribed Lupron or another gonadotropin-releasing hormone agonist, which most of us here are familiar with as the drugs called puberty blockers when used in pediatric transgender medicine. And these have an even more disturbing side effect profile than oral contraceptive pills. She injects herself with Lupron every day for 7 to 14 days. The fertility doctors then give her a synthetic follicle-stimulating hormone, which she also must inject daily. This hormone overstimulates the ovaries, causing them to ripen many more eggs than the natural 1 or 2 per cycle. She's subjected to another transvaginal ultrasound to determine that her eggs are ripe. Doctors then anesthetize her, insert a very long needle through her vaginal wall, and under ultrasound guidance, remove as many ripe eggs as they can find. People believe that differing rates of compensation for eggs and sperm in the human gamete market make up for the discrepancy in effort and risk between the two processes. Men selling their sperm are paid an average of $120 per ejaculation. They can sell sperm up to twice a week and can make over $10,000 a year jerking off to porn at sperm banks. Sperm banks will accept sperm from men ages 18 to 39, and there is literally no medical risk from the process of retrieving sperm. A man who remains healthy could theoretically sell sperm weekly for several decades, making hundreds of thousands of dollars over the same time period. Women who sell their eggs are paid an average of $5,000 per egg retrieval. Women whose eggs are highly desirable on the human egg market, generally women who are Asian or Jewish, from healthy families, naturally thin, athletic, and academically talented, can make up to $20,000 per procedure. Due to the health risks and the decreasing quality of a woman's eggs after multiple rounds of ovarian hyperstimulation, fertility clinics do not allow women to sell their eggs more than 6 times. No man has ever died from masturbating to porn at a sperm bank, but death is a possible side effect from selling eggs. Sperm donation entails male pleasure. Egg donation entails severe female discomfort and pain. Egg selling carries risks of hemorrhage, infection, and infertility. There are no long-term studies on the effects of egg selling on women's bodies. Egg donors sign consent forms saying there is no evidence that the process can lead to cancer or other serious health sequelae, but what this means is no studies have been conducted on the topic. In vitro fertilization, or IVF, carries the same risks to women as egg selling, in addition to the risks of pregnancy and birth. Studies on women who have undergone IVF show that multiple rounds of ovarian hyperstimulation double the lifetime risk of ovarian cancer. IVF pregnancies have increased risks of identical twinning, placental malfunction, cesarean delivery, depression, and anxiety. IVF children are 10 times more likely to suffer from the deadly cancer neuroblastoma than children who are conceived naturally. IVF children also have higher rates of leukemia, liver cancer, brain cancer, and soft tissue cancers. Despite the elusive promise of genetically healthier children, children conceived via IVF are more likely to experience premature birth, low birth weight, cardiac malformations, and disorders of the central nervous system. The oldest person conceived through IVF is only 45 years old, so we are just now beginning to observe the longer-term consequences of this experiment on humanity. IVF qualifies as medical torture and medical experimentation on women and children. Despite grand promises, IVF continues to have a very low success rate. The process fails to produce a viable pregnancy more often than it succeeds. Fertility doctors subject women to painful and humiliating procedures, and only 50 to 60% of women who undergo 3 or more rounds of egg harvesting and IVF eventually become pregnant. But every round of IVF yields information furthering the scientific quest for total control of human reproduction. Big fertility has been learning a lot over the decades of human experimentation. The process of IVF has progressed from simply putting an egg and a sperm sample in a petri dish and allowing fertilization to occur. Most IVF embryos are now the product of intracytoplasmic sperm injection, ICSI or ICSI. To accomplish ICSI, scientists remove the outer membrane of the egg, the zona pellucida, the intelligent membrane which allows a chosen sperm to enter and fertilize the ovum. When this layer is intact, an egg will self-destruct if scientists attempt to manually penetrate her. Scientists wash off the zona pellucida, then remove the tail from a sperm, place the head of the sperm in a micropipette, and forcibly inject the sperm head into the egg. At best, ICSI removes all natural intelligence from the process of human fertilization. At worst, it can be described as egg rape. At least half of all attempts to fertilize an egg outside of the female body fail to create an embryo. When IVF does work, embryos are allowed to grow in the lab for 3 to 5 days until they consist of approximately 60 cells. At this point, scientists remove 1 cell for genetic testing, a process called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or PGD. IVF customers are told this makes the process safer by eliminating the chance of implanting an embryo with a genetic defect. There are as yet no studies on the long-term consequences of removing over 1% of a person's embryonic matter. That is a child conceived by IVF. This is a common photo theme for families that use IVF to conceive, where they take a picture of the newborn surrounded by all the medications or symbols of the medications the mother was subjected to in order to conceive. Without interventional support, human embryos created outside of a woman stop growing within a few days. Lab-grown embryos are either transferred into women after 5 to 7 days or cryogenically frozen for later use. Embryo transfer involves 1 or more embryos being placed in a sterile catheter, then inserted into the woman's uterus, vaginally. Fertility doctors then give women synthetic hormones and closely surveil their bodies to determine if pregnancy has occurred. Women must inject themselves daily with progesterone and are subjected to frequent transvaginal ultrasounds for the first 10 weeks after the embryo transfer. Currently, 1 in 50 American live births result from artificial reproductive technology. In Denmark, 10% of children born in 2022 were conceived through IVF. Infertility can create grief and desperation, leaving women vulnerable to predatory forces. Big fertility offers to save women from our defective bodies and give us children. But the $23 billion a year fertility industry does not expend any resources to actually cure infertility. Very little research is being done on why so many women are experiencing infertility. It is not coincidental that the medical industry and international health organizations spend billions inducing infertility in women around the world. Hormonal contraception and sterilizing surgeries are aggressively pushed on poor women, young women, and women of color by the same forces making money treating infertility in wealthier populations. In the West, young women are subjected to the long con of pressure to delay childbearing until the socially acceptable age of their late 30s or early 40s, the time when female fertility sharply declines. Instead of creating policies and social practices that support women having children when they are most fertile and most likely to have good maternal and child health outcomes, liberal feminist forces are now studying and promoting the idea that true equality for women means the ability to have genetically related children across the entire adult lifespan. The same forces intentionally creating female infertility are pouring billions of dollars into extending female reproductive longevity. What this means, according to the people funding the research, is making egg retrieval, frozen egg storage, and surrogacy easier and more affordable. While scientists have not been working on an actual cure for infertility, they have been meticulously studying human embryonic development. Promising relief from human suffering, fertility scientists are experiencing with gene editing of embryos with CRISPR technology. The first known genetically edited humans were born in 2018. Despite warnings against the practice and dystopian tales from previous generations, we have entered the world of designer babies. Children born through IVF already undergo pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Detailed understanding of the human genome and the technology to genetically edit embryos currently exists. In 2017, Stanford scholar Harry Greeley wrote a book called The End of Sex, in which he argues that by 2040, the majority of children born in the developed world will be created through this technology. Greeley is fully supportive of this brave new world, envisioning a society no longer plagued by children with genetic diseases like Tay-Sachs and Down syndrome, but also free of cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and other illnesses with genetic causes. I am less optimistic. My pessimism deepens when I think about the burgeoning field of artificial gametes. In March 2023, media around the world announced that scientists had created mice with two fathers. Since the early 2000s, researchers have been working on in vitro gametogenesis, or IVG, the process of creating artificial sperm and egg cells. Blood, hair, or skin cells are transformed into stem cells. These stem cells are then genetically engineered into sperm or egg cells. Last year, scientists succeeded in fertilizing artificial eggs with artificial sperm and creating viable mouse embryos. These embryos were gestated and birthed by female mice, but the published results asserted that the mice had no mothers. Very wealthy gay men are quite interested in the possibility of creating babies with two genetic fathers. One of these men is Matt Krisiloff, a venture capitalist involved in the development of ChatGPT. Krisiloff states he wants to have genetically related children with his partner, Lucas Harrington, the founder of Mammoth Biosciences, a company at the forefront of CRISPR gene editing technology. With money from Sam Altman, former CEO of OpenAI and former boyfriend of Krisiloff, these men started Conception Biosciences. The motto of Conception is turning stem cells into human eggs. These men may be close to achieving their goal of genetically motherless children. On September 7th, 2023, Israeli scientists announced they had created a human embryo without the use of natural sperm or egg cells. The pro-tech propaganda outlet Wired magazine routinely runs articles praising Sam Altman and his colleagues. Wired has enthusiastically endorsed all of Altman's endeavors, from artificial intelligence to artificial sperm and egg cells. In August 2023, Wired published an article entitled, "Preferring Biological Children is Immoral." The article asserts that genetic familial relationships are social constructs based in white supremacy. Foreseeing a world where most children are created through artificial reproductive technology and gene editing, the authors argue for a future where preferring genetically related children is stigmatized. But they do offer one exception. Due to a history of reproductive marginalization, it will still be ethical for gay men to prefer and select for genetically related offspring. In her article entitled, "Mommy, What Did You Do in the Industrial Revolution?" feminist home birth mother and obstetrician Lauren Plant laments that birth has moved first out of the home and now out of the vagina. We currently face the possibility that pregnancy and birth may move out of the female body entirely. Viatra Biomedical Corporation has raised over $25 million with the goal of creating artificial wombs. The European Union program Horizon has dedicated 2.9 million euros to researching and developing artificial wombs. The director of the EU Artificial Womb Project, Guido Oy, said in 2019, "During the next 5 years, we will conduct further research and test these technologies in a European collaboration and continue to develop them until we manage to realize a first prototype of an artificial womb. This is a wonderful challenge." As Kay Yang notes in her brilliant presentation, The Great Reset of Motherhood, the propaganda around artificial wombs is escalating. The ruling class is preparing our minds for this technology. We are being exposed to frequent stories about the soon-to-be available artificial wombs. In December of 2022, Ectolife launched a multi-million-dollar ad campaign misleadingly implying that artificial womb facilities already exist. In June 2023, Psychology Today ran an article entitled, "In a Decade, Human Bodies May Not Be Required to Make a Baby." We need to start having the conversation about whether or not an organism created with gametes made from skin cells and gestated in an artificial womb is human. We need to talk about this before the technology is already in use and we are silenced. We will be accused of hurting the feelings and erasing the existence of those who have used this technology. Looking at the trajectory of fertility medicine over the past 50 years, we cannot assume that scientists will fail at this project. While we wait for what seems like the inevitable artificial wombs, research on uterus transplantation is advancing quickly. Over 40 infants have now been born to women who have received living or deceased donor wombs. No one knows how these children will be affected by growing in a transplanted organ and being exposed to anti-rejection medication throughout pregnancy, but the science advances nonetheless. Many American university hospital systems now boast uterine transplant programs. The University of Pennsylvania Womb Transplant Department actively recruits women to undergo elective hysterectomy and donate their healthy wombs to the project. Under the guise of helping the tiny subset of women who were born without wombs, scientists are gleaning enormous amounts of information on how to eventually transplant uteruses into men. When I bring up the topic of men receiving uterus transplants, I inevitably hear a chorus of, "That will never happen," followed by a list of perceived reasons why the male body cannot support a functioning uterus. The scientists hard at work at transplanting uteruses into men are well aware of all of these arguments, and they are countering each one. 50 years of big fertility's mass experimentation on women has yielded information on how to create a baby using a body that is not hospitable to pregnancy and birth. Scientists are studying women with Mayer-Rokitansky-Kunster-Hauser, or MRKH syndrome, a rare congenital condition in which females are born without a vagina and a uterus. Some of these women have undergone uterine transplants and vaginoplasty. Women with MRKH syndrome do not have connective tissue or a vascular system attached to a uterus. Womb transplants in this demographic are being studied with the goal of learning how to transplant a uterus into the male body. Scientists are also studying patients with congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH, which causes masculinization of female fetuses and lifelong hormonal dysfunction in affected girls and women. Women with classical CAH produce high levels of testosterone and usually have external genitalia that appear male. There are very few recorded cases of natural conception and birth in women with classical CAH, but many women with CAH have been treated in fertility clinics, and some of these treatments have led to viable pregnancies and live births. Scientists believe the data from these cases support the safety of uterine transplant and pregnancy in males whose testicles remain intact. While radical feminists have rejected the term pregnant men as it applies to pregnant trans-identified women, The fertility industry is taking information gained from this population to further research actual male pregnancy. Women taking testosterone during pregnancy are mined for data to support the goal of male pregnancy. One researcher states, the closest analogous population to transgender women may be transgender men on exogenous testosterone. Reassuringly, uncomplicated pregnancies have been reported. No one needs a uterus transplant. Unlike other organ donation, uterine transplantation is never necessary to prolong life or restore function. Uterine transplantation poses major known and unknown risks to both recipients and the offspring born from the procedure. It is difficult to make an ethical argument for why only females should be allowed to access this unnecessary and risky technology, and those promoting womb transplants into men know this. All of mainstream medicine has fallen for the trans women are women lie. Males who assert they are female are viewed by many doctors as no different from women born without a uterus and a vagina. In addition to creating male pregnancy, researchers are advocating for uterine transplantation into men so these men can experience menstruation. Some second-wave radical feminists, notably Shulamith Firestone and Marge Piercy, celebrated the idea of artificial womb technology and removing human reproduction from the female body. Both Firestone and Piercy postulated that freeing women from reproduction would fully liberate women, allowing us to be full members of society, unburdened from patriarchal oppression and reproductive control. Interestingly, neither Firestone nor Piercy were mothers themselves. As a midwife and a woman who found her power through sovereign pregnancy and birth, I disagree strongly with the idea that motherhood is by nature oppressive. I understand the horrors of compulsory motherhood and patriarchal control of women's reproductive capacity, but my feminist utopia does not involve elimination of pregnancy and birth from the realm of women. I shudder when I look into the future and see men making ova from their skin cells and incubating babies in artificial wombs. With the additional development of virtual reality augmented high-quality sex robots, I fear that ruling class men may stop making women entirely, though they will probably keep some of us available as exotics. Much second-wave writing on reproductive technology shares my concerns. In 1985, Gina Correa wrote The Mother Machine, a radical feminist treatise on reproductive technology that remains incredibly pertinent today. I urge everyone trying to make sense of reproductive technology and its effect on women and humanity to read this book. Correa incisively tells us, reproductive technologies are transforming the experience of motherhood and placing it under the control of men. Women's claim to maternity is being loosened. Men's claim to paternity is being strengthened. In 1993, Janice Raymond wrote Women as Wombs, critiquing the emergence of reproductive technologies. She warned that these technologies increasingly sever the fetus embryo from the woman, erase the biological reality of motherhood, and relegate women to mere incubator status. She states, radical feminist opponents of the new reproductive technologies do not pit nature against technology, nor do we extol a new vision of biology as destiny for women. Opposition to these technologies is based on the more political feminist perspective that women as a class have a stake in reclaiming the female body. By refusing to yield control of it to men, to the fetus, to the state, and most certainly to those liberals who advocate that women control our bodies by giving up our control. I want to end with an excerpt from Patricia Spallone's prophetic 1989 book on reproductive technology, Beyond Conception. Those who trust that IVF, artificial wombs, and genetic engineering can be used to make life better trust that scientists and the state will not abuse their authority over women's eggs, embryos, and bodies, not realizing that such a view means women should exchange our body parts and reproductive role for progress. A woman-centered approach to reproduction recognizes the interrelationship among oppressions, among sexism, racism, ableism, and class division. It recognizes economic and global inequalities at play in our dependence on technologies. It means we must accept that everything is not solvable by some technological solution and admit that there are risks to living that experts cannot solve for us. To change our relationship to science and technology in the most woman-respecting, life-respecting way, we must start from the recognition that we are our bodies, we are ourselves. We do not have to accept the man-made paradoxes and the splitting up of women into parts, eggs, embryos, wombs, placenta, which has been so ingrained as to seem natural. We can overturn the dualities of mind, body, rational, emotional, science, not science, and the ancient conceptual split embryo woman. Knowledge of women's fertility and procreative powers must have to do with our bodies and be grounded in our experiences in the world, in feeling and doing, which includes thinking and observing, not what scientists find out for us in laboratories after they have taken our insides out. Thank you.
Mary Lou, thank you so much, first of all, for your incredible research, and second, for taking the time to share it with all of us here today and in this recording. And we will definitely do our best to spread this recording far and wide, because women all over the country and all over the world need to hear your message. I want to just say, I'm so happy that you addressed the issue of some second wave feminists, Firestone and Piercy in particular, arguing that motherhood is inherently oppressive. And part of the reason I found that so interesting is I've struggled with that aspect of their analysis. And in the, in the battles that we currently fought, we radical feminists find ourselves fighting today, so many conservative men like to point to arguments like that in order to argue that it was second wave feminists who are at fault for all of this, because some second wave feminists did take the positions that you've outlined. And so I just think we're in such a difficult position when we as radical feminists need to be standing up for women and girls as a sex class against the threats posed not only by the liberal feminists who are pushing artificial reproduction, but also by the conservative men who like to blame us for all the problems of today. Do you want to respond to that, Mary Lou? I'm going to check the chat. There's a comment. There's a question for you from one of the participants, but if you'd like to respond, please feel free.
I think it's important to remember that Piercy and Firestone were writing at a time when motherhood for too many women was compulsory, that it was not a choice. And yes, compulsory motherhood is by nature oppressive, but when freely chosen, motherhood can be liberatory for women, and it can be profoundly fulfilling for them. It's terrible that we're placed in this, we're viewed from this perspective that we created these problems for ourselves, when those women were responding to an actual problem of many women were being forced to give birth against their will.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know as much about Piercy, but if memory serves, Firestone's work addressing this topic was published in 1970, which, as Mary Lou points out, is 3 years before Roe v. Wade was passed. So there is another question in the chat. Does Mary Lou have suggestions on doula trainings that are in harmony with her values?
Oh, that's a hard one. I am a supporter of Indie Birth. I think that their work is good. You could check them out. I think it's indiebirth.com. I'm not enough in that world of knowing who's doing trainings right now to give a further recommendation than that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I think we'll end it there just by thanking you again. We will absolutely do our best to spread this video far and wide. Thanks for everyone who was here today. And Mary Lou, you touched on it at some point, maybe 2/3 of the way through your talk. We have to talk about this. We have to talk about this as radical feminists. We have to talk about it as women. We have to talk about this because, as you say, it is so dehumanizing. It is so frightening, and it's coming. So thank you so much, Mary Lou. I'll end the recording now. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kara.